we're delighted to have Daniel Hall. Daniel is a rare appraiser where he is qualified. The appraisal market is a bit like the church. You have the Catholic Church, the Protestant, and in this case you have ISTAT and American Society of Appraisals, ASA, and Dan is actually qualified in both, which makes him pretty unique, if anyone. I think you're one of a few. And you're now going to take us through aircraft values, but we want to make this as interactive as possible. So Daniel will throw out valuations for any aircraft type and by manufacturer serial number.
All right, morning everyone. Thank you Al and the team as always for having us down here. So yeah, we were speaking and we thought it'd be useful to have a discussion on values and appraisals. There's been a bit of talk about it in recent sessions, but just a bit background quickly. As Al said, I've been with the Cirium team now for about 15 years, actually appraising aircraft as an ASA and an ISTAT certified appraiser. And I wanted to present just a couple of slides on some trends, just in how we see the market. So this is actually using Cirium's appraisal value data. It's our opinion of value on aircraft. But it gives us a good way to sort of just illustrate where we are and where things have been. And we'll also talk about where we might be going over the next year or so as well. So this first slide here, I'll just explain the slide before we go into it. This is what we'd call fleet-weighted constant age change slide. And this is looking at aircraft market values. What I mean by constant age is if you're comparing the same age of an aircraft over a period of time. So if a 10-year-old Challenger 350 was worth 10 million at one point in time, and if that's gone up by 50%, then a 10-year-old aircraft is now worth 15 million today. That's what I mean by that. So we've broken this down by the pretty commonly known aircraft size segments and categories. And actually, I'm really glad that we added the business turboprops here, because I've learned over the last couple of days actually how important the King Air and the Cessna Caravan markets are. But what we can basically see in the green bars is the change since the beginning of 2020. 50 to 60% increase in value on a constant age basis for any small aircraft up to super mid-sized aircraft. So if anyone's been working in this sector now for, I'd say, 10 years, you'll be very aware of the increase we've had in market value. And this illustrates this point really, really well. So huge increases in market value. Just quickly on some of the reasons for those increases. Well, the initial years of the pandemic brought a lot of new people into the market, first-time buyers, but also new people who started using charter operations coming down from the airlines. We saw charter operators pretty much buying up anything they could get their hands on to offer availability to new customers. So growth in charter, but also we saw an increase in new pricing. So again, if anyone's been in this market a long time, you'll probably know that manufacturer new pricing has been pretty stable for a very, very long time, not really seeing any sort of inflationary change year over year. But the extra demand in the last few years, coupled with reduced supply, the supply chain challenges, production rates, that did actually enable some manufacturers to increase new pricing. In some cases, almost 30% increases in new pricing over the period of 2 or 3 years. So that's sort of baked into this data as well. And actually, an increase in the new pricing, believe it or not, does help older aircraft as well. It helps the whole sort of value chain. Over to the right, long range. So this is Gulfstreams, Bombardier, Globals. This category actually didn't see much change at all. I think it's about 15% up since the beginning of 2020, and that's because naturally we wouldn't see first-time buyers buying a a large global, or we didn't see the charter operators buying up these aircraft. So that's sort of relatively unchanged. Probably for some relief for the lenders and the financier community as well, that we didn't see such rapid change in that category. And then the final point on this slide actually is the yellow bars on the right-hand side of each category. This is the change in the last 1 year, so just 12-month period. What you can take away actually is just plus minus 5% change. In other words, the market from a valuation perspective has been very sort of calm and rational over the past year. Back, you may remember after the global financial crisis, we saw big sort of off the edge of the cliff value drops. We've not seen anything like that. Supply and inventory has increased a bit. Demand has dropped a little bit, but it hasn't resulted in this big transition in aircraft values, and you can very much see that indicated here across these categories. So that was by aircraft segment. And then just quickly here, just to illustrate this with a couple of popular aircraft types. And what I've done here is I've chosen the top 10 types for value increases and the top 10 for value decreases just over the past year. A lot of King Airs there, actually, which might be of interest to this market, coincidentally. Really, actually, that's driven by, again, one of the reasons I was saying earlier about increases in new pricing from Textron. I think it won't be too long until we see new King Airs up to 10 million US dollars, which was impossible to think of, actually, about 5 years ago. And the Boeing BBJ-1 is actually there, and that's driven by other factors in the commercial airliner market. There's been a huge demand for engines, actually. So improvements in engine values actually driven the values of that type. For the ones that have lost value, the main takeaway here is that they're all generally older types, older technology types. And generally in appraising, what happens is in any sort of value cycle, when things start to turn and the market softens and weakens a bit, it's the older stuff, the older technology types, which see some reductions in value. And that's exactly what's happening here without cherry picking the data. This is really what's going on here. So that's sort of an illustration, and I hope that helps sort of give an idea of sort of where we are. And now we thought we could basically have a bit of a discussion about sort of what's going on. And I encourage you to get the questions coming in on Slido. But we've got a few talking points here, and Al, maybe I could start with the first one, and then we could see.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from anyone in the room? We'll also track Slido. All the slides will be available on the app, yeah, and we'll send out afterwards as well. Let's jump to the second one. We've talked a lot about tariffs. You mentioned that increasing prices of new aircraft does help, and I think we saw the corollary of that when OEMs were discounting following 2008, and I think that hit the values. So you could argue that tariffs could help keep pre-owned aircraft values higher.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. Do you do appraising? There's a lot of things that could happen. I think the word is could happen. Yes, I think we're watching, on one hand, we're watching new aircraft very, very closely. I'm particularly intrigued about increases or the high tariffs on raw materials and the effect that could have on increased cost of production. I don't know the answer there, but I want to learn more about that actually, and if those increases will be passed on. Probably not for larger aircraft, but maybe smaller aircraft. They're more sort of sensitive to the cost of production. But yeah, new aircraft pricing could go up, and that might be okay in the market because we're still in a situation where there hasn't been a growth of production rates. The market for new aircraft is really constrained actually, The manufacturers have not been able to produce as much as they want to. Generally, they have about backlogs of 2 years. They've been trying to unlock rate growths, and they've not been able to because of the supply chain. I would add, though, we ourselves, we forecast a growth in new deliveries last year into sort of 10% growth in units. It never happened. It never happened because we still had a supply chain issue. We had about 3% growth, I think. But this year, Q1, I think there's been about 12% growth in new deliveries just in Q1 from the business jet OEMs. Now that's quite impressive, actually. That's moving some numbers there. But of course, tariffs could derail that. I think that there will be, if I look to, say, the commercial airliner world, there's already talk of aircraft deferrals. So I think the manufacturers will be shifting around the order book, and that would be a bit of that happening. But yeah, on pricing, it could be okay for pricing, and that could sort of mute the impact on aircraft. Where I think is going to be a challenge, though, is the second-hand market, because we learned a lot about how if you bring in a pre-owned aircraft in from another region, it may be subject to a tariff. 3/4 of the US's purchases of second-hand aircraft are from within the US. So 3/4 of aircraft will be okay, although great point was made that they must have had an original import certificate anyway, so it's something worth checking. But for all those sales from outside, I've listed there the UK, Canada, Germany, Mexico. Now, Canada and Mexico will be also okay, but yeah, there's some other markets where there's going to be difficulties in trading aircraft. And I think if I bring this back to as an appraiser, I'm concerned in the sense of when I'm talking to the market and understanding about pricing and transaction pricing, it's just knowing exactly what went into that number. And I think that maybe I can speak for all appraisers, but we're going to have to sort of step up our game a bit here and really try and understand the pricing. You can't just say this sold for 10 million and then walk away because it might be 8 million. So that'll be an immediate challenge with the tariff. I think it's going to be an interesting year.
You've got a question. You've got lots of questions, but one is, how do you value aircraft which have engines enrolled on OEM programs, so a manufacturer program, versus third-party programs and no program? And what's the average percentage?
Yeah, I can probably guess who that question might have come from. It's a great question. I mean, I would say that the engine manufacturers and their provision of programs have done a really excellent job in making not only some very clear and understandable programs for the community. They've worked closely with financiers and appraisers because they are important. We do, believe it or not, we do still see examples of aircraft which have been whether abandoned or repossessed, and not having a program can lead to some very serious issues. The cost to put engines through a shop visit now is tremendous. Like, the cost is huge. Particularly in the last 5 years, maintenance costs have really gone up far beyond inflationary rates. So again, it really highlights the importance of the engine maintenance programs and other maintenance programs as well to provide that coverage. Generally, I mean, as appraisers, we like to reflect the market. So with that in mind, when I say this, generally the OEM programs are more desirable than a third-party program, but we reflect the market and the market conditions at that time. And it may be that it's quite neutral between them, but certainly for aircraft which are not on a program, it may not be an issue when it's young and low hours, but if you're looking at, say, a Gulfstream or Bombardier Global, and it's got 5,000 to 8,000 hours on those engines, it's a bit of a red flag there. As a buyer, you need to be extremely aware, and we would see it sell for a lower price and take longer to sell.
You've got a really hard question. How are macroeconomic factors, such as interest rates, global fleet aging, and OEM backlogs, reshaping long-term residual value forecasts? How can you forecast when it's so uncertain?
Yeah, I guess unpack that a bit. I mean, we do produce residual value forecasts, and these are informed by historical analysis of our market value opinions, and then our expertise in how we see the market, the competitive dynamics for that aircraft type, etc. It's really tough. The best way we can grade ourselves on forecasting is to sort of review them each year and score ourselves. We didn't catch the growth in values for the light jet segment, for instance. That huge growth we saw in OEM pricing, we had to revise in a positive manner our residual value forecasting. But now, as you say, it's sort of a disruption of the world order. Interest rates, there's no one word or one phrase answer for this. We, as appraisers, we just have to keep looking at what's going on. Any other points in that question? I didn't really touch on.
No, it was good. I think we've got actually loads, but we're going to start. The final question. Okay. You've lived through the downturn following the global financial crisis, and it was very different. OEMs had backlogs which weren't as secure, they'd overproduced. It seems like we could see a correction. There could be how many lights are flashing on your dashboard? If 10 is we're in a full downturn, how many lights are on now on your Daniel Hall?
Yeah, there's a couple of lights flashing, definitely, because, for instance, right, we in 2021, 2, 3, we saw a huge growth in flight activity. Things are really picking up. More people are using business aviation. It's not really growing anymore. It's still up, and people are talking about, well, it's still up, but it's not growing as the fleet continues to grow. But as you say, our backlogs, they've been good, a couple years. I think across the OEM space, there will be some very serious concerns now, particularly because there's multiple OEMs in this space. It's quite different to, say, the commercial market, where it's very much a duopoly. And actually, yes, while this may cause issues with one OEM in particular, it's not going to lead to, say, an oversupply of aircraft. In fact, it's going to keep the market quite constrained. But I do think the OEMs will be quite concerned. They'll be looking to sort of ride it out as much as they can, but also thinking about what they possibly could do. I think, again, go back to being an appraiser, we don't want to make any sort of knee-jerk or quick reactions here. We want to reflect the market. As you see, values-wise, everything's okay. Everything's okay right now. But I stress the need that this year, I think, could bring some interesting points, and we'll have to watch the market really, really closely. For everyone, stay on top of the great webinars and everything that Al and his team put together, and it's just a really good way of keeping on top of the market and what might be happening.
And on that plug, thank you. I didn't ask for. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dan. That was great.
All right, cheers. Thank you.